No cold open today, everyone. Just a quick note that I wanted to drop in before we get into the episode. We end up doing a big old honkin' huge heavy bag segment, and we had so many questions and enjoyed going into them in so much depth that you will not actually hear all of the questions on this week's episode. So if you did submit a question on the Heavy Hands Patreon as a $5 patron and you were looking forward to having it answered, do not despair. You will either find it shortly in a bonus episode, or quite possibly, since we're going to have to bank an episode in advance in the next couple weeks, just as a second or third segment on an upcoming main episode in the very near future. Enjoy the show. Hello, everyone, one and all. Yada, yada, yada. Welcome to Heavy Hands. I'm your host, Connor Rebush. With me, as always, is Phil McKenzie, and we are here to talk to you about light heavyweights.
Yay.
Yay. You know, Phil, could have been a lot worse.
Really could, yeah. I mean, it was pretty bad in one way, in that a promising young contender had his leg fall off. But it could have been a really grim fight, and it could have been a depressing end to one of MMA's great weird Cinderella stories. Wasn't.
No, I mean, worst of all, it could have been a win for Patrick Wyman.
Yeah.
I mean, belated.
From deep below the grave at this point.
Patrick Wyman would have been rolling over in his grave. Just
with glee.
With glee, right. He would have been, I don't know, just cranking off in his grave.
I was wondering if you were going to go there, and then I was like, no, Connor will be classy enough to avoid that. And I didn't get to the next obvious part of this process, which is, no, he won't. What are you doing?
No, he won't. You could feel me loading up for it, so to speak.
So to speak, yes.
Well, Jan Blachowicz fought Alexander Rakic in the main event of last week's UFC card. And we are going to talk about a few of these fights before moving on to a lot of heavy bag questions. In the absence of a good UFC card next week to talk about, and in the absence of, lots of other great fights happened this weekend, but I didn't get the chance to watch any of them. So in the absence of other combat sports to discuss, we have just an absolute ass load of questions from patrons that we're going to get to later on in this episode. Well, let's go ahead.
And in facing our, in fact, an upcoming gap for between UFC events, we have somehow decided to splurge.
Yes.
All of the questions we could find in a single oversized episode. That's why we did it.
No one could ever accuse me of bad planning. So let's talk about the main event of last week's UFC Fight Night. Jan Blachowicz, Alexander Rakic. And as I said, actually a pretty good fight. Even the very Rakic-y portions were better than I think I've seen them in the past. But I will say that I was very gratified to have, made let's be honest, a pretty simple read, but to have once again made it correctly. That Alexander Rakic, like many modern MMA strikers, is heavily dependent on his ability to kick the shit out of people's legs. And how do we figure that works against the only light heavyweight, truly one of the few high-level fighters who consistently checks and defends low kicks? And the answer is not that well. I think, honestly, Rakic's striking game sort of fell apart here. Which isn't to say that he got blown out of the water. Although I think as long as this fight stayed on the feet, it was headed in the direction of Blachowicz just beating him more and more. But he got a lot of kicks checked and couldn't check the low kicks coming back at him in return. And I think we were already seeing just a gradual shift of momentum towards Blachowicz just being superior on the feet as a result of that one single factor.
Yeah, I mean, it was sort of 2-1 when the fight ended, I think. Obviously the third round hadn't finished. First round was very clearly Blachowicz on the feet, and the second round was quite clearly Rakic shoots some relatively uneventful top control.
Although towards the end, I liked the leg-mounted uppercuts a lot.
Yeah.
Very cool shots when he sort of triangled Jan's legs against the fence and had a bit of a base under him and threw some nice, like, Tim Boach-esque uppercuts up from under Blachowicz's arm. And they landed really solidly. He threw quite a few of them. They were very nice. But yes, Blachowicz winning on the feet, and I think was doing very well, provided he didn't get taken down again for 3 minutes or more, was doing very well on the feet in round 3.
I mean, I think the issue with Rakic is that his game is his striking game is primarily built around his low kicks, and his wider game is built around the assumption that he is a very good striker.
Yeah.
So, he was able to get a crazy athlete takedown on Blachowicz, but had no real replicable way of doing that again. Even any particular will to do that again.
Yeah.
Also, I think, Blachowicz was kind of closing exchanges. He was winning on the clinch breaks, another thing that he's pretty good at.
Mm-hmm.
Weird how, become sort of an MMA cheat code. Things that people do. Just, exiting clinches lazily, and also just defending low kicks.
Mm-hmm.
People are just like, what is this guy doing? Magic?
The thing I do from really far away doesn't work, and then when I get close to him, he hurts me.
Yeah, but also he was just the smarter combination puncher. He was mostly just winning the straight boxing exchanges as well.
Yeah.
Although I did think, which is certainly he still just looks like a promising fighter.
Sure.
His punches are looking way nicer than they used to. He is able to throw a nice, clean, mechanically a coherent and accurate one too. It was just that was sort of all he was throwing.
Yeah, and I think that when it got sort of figured out and taken away, then he sort of started just trying things again, which we've seen more of in the past. There was one in particular, gigantic right uppercut thrown with no setup from very far away.
Mm-hmm.
And Blachowicz has already shown 24 times in this fight that seeing a huge right hand of any kind, he's just going to lean back. And so that obviously wasn't going to work unless he just didn't see it. Huge overhands were whiffing again and again. And meanwhile, in round 3, it took him a little while, but Blachowicz was also starting to get his jab in. And it was pretty clear already that Rakic was very uncomfortable with that. I think also just the kicks, that is in a way, Rakic, I think, views that as his distance bridging tool, as a setup tool. And so his whole rhythm, his ability to build anything was severely compromised when those just kind of very quickly stopped working. I mean, they almost didn't work at all. The body kicks were kind of there, though he still had trouble getting to the right range to land them really cleanly. But almost from the first 20 seconds of the fight, Blachowicz was checking most of the low kicks. And then landing better
ones.
And
Rakic wasn't.
And Rakic was not, and was, I think, feeling the effects of that. There's even an outside possibility that it was Blachowicz's own low kicks, or perhaps Rakic is getting checked, that could have influenced the fact that his, I'm guessing, LCL just snapped. I
think it was his ACL, but I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, it could well have just been a compensation injury.
Right.
He was trying not to put weight on the injured foot, his lead foot, and then he ended up, just his rear foot, his rear knee, as the case may be.
Could have been.
I mean, that was basically what happened to Thiago Santos against John Jones.
Yeah.
Screwed up one knee and then trying to work around it on the other one, he screwed that one up as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what actually the moment that led to the injury, which also, I mean, it's just as likely it was completely incidental. Something aggravated in training, pre-existing issue of some kind, or just a freak accident. Sometimes people just, I mean, I recall a story from someone once who said they were in a gym and they just tried to push a plate across the floor with their foot, and they just sort of twisted their toes and it just snapped their ACL. Yeah. So sometimes these things just freakishly terrible things happen. It's just one of the notable weak points in the human body. But the exchange where it occurred, he was scurrying backwards to get away from a kick, and then Jan tried to follow up with a left hand, and he jerked away from it onto his back leg, and that's when the injury occurred. So, yeah, a disappointing end to a fight, but if you're like me and you are deeply in love with Jan Blachowicz and want to see him do well at every opportunity, I think you have good reason to be proud of his performance here. Yes, he got taken down, and he did try some things and couldn't quite get up until the very end of the round, which I took as a good sign that, okay, maybe at least he knows now. In future, he can scoot to the fence and work his way up. On the feet, I thought a very just comprehensively classic Jan Blachowicz performance, and he looked very chill and calm and at ease even when things weren't going that well. He didn't seem close to gassing either in round 3 when the striking was going on. That was
definitely something to be, especially after that second round. Mm-hmm. Because you think of a fight where Blachowicz has given up a round of top control and then actually won.
Yeah. Some of that may be owed to the fact that
one of the triggers for him going downhill.
Some of that may be owed to the fact that Rakic was still largely very inactive. Didn't really make Jan work. Most of the activity in that round was Jan attempting a few submissions, which he actually got kind of close on a triangle attempt. Kind of close. But yeah, I thought pretty encouraging performance from old Yanni, who, by the way, walked out to Basil Palladorus's The Anvil of Crom from Conan the Barbarian, which is maybe the best walkout song I've ever heard. I was very excited by that choice. I love that movie. I love that soundtrack. Great song. Awesome. So Jan continues to just score pathetic nerd points with me in liking The Witcher.
And he didn't need any more.
No, he didn't. But he's just piling up a surplus now.
Yeah.
And we appreciate that. All right. So Ryan Spahn and Iwan Kutalaba had a ridiculous fight. It was actually very fun while it lasted, as expected. Classic Kutalaba loss. I don't really have a ton to say about that. Didn't really learn anything new about either guy.
It was just one of those ones where he got caught by straight punches early and then was just like
too mad.
Feeling like Taz the Tasmanian Devil.
Yeah.
Of Spahn's reach.
A classic.
And just like with more and more fury until he spun himself into his grave.
Yeah, really a classic Kutalaba performance in that I saw some other things for him which, make him look like quite a good fighter. But he's just too mad. he couldn't actually sit on his advantages. So, but I like seeing the wrestling.
It is great that like, his ring name is the Hulk because you're like, oh yeah, that's because you're strong, right? Like, no, it's because he's mindlessly angry all the time.
You wouldn't like me when I'm angry, but you'll probably beat me. Okay, let's talk about just a real heartbreak barn burner in the middle of the card here, about which I think there's quite a lot to say, actually. That was Davey Grant versus Louis Smolka, which I kind of thought of as a squash match.
Yeah, obviously.
because, and
like he's a big noodly dude. He's slow. He doesn't have that much defense. He's not that durable, even though he hasn't got knocked out that often, has he? We did this before. We looked it up and we were like, Smolka has barely been knocked out.
Yeah. This is now, I think, the second.
Yeah. Yeah, but he's obviously not that durable. It's a case of him getting, and then tapped out. But yeah, he was going to get punched in the body. He was going to get punched in the head. He was up against a super durable, very good grappler who was just too violent for him.
Yeah. Which
no reason to assume he was making it out the first. And it looked like he wasn't going to make it out the first.
Yeah, and it looked like, even though he did, that he was going to do just, continually worse for as long as the fight lasted after that. Because Davey Grant really did, a great performance from Davey Grant in that first round. And then just requiring a little adjustment, I would say a great performance overall. Honestly, it is really nice to see Davey Grant doing as well as he is now. Even if a lot of his most notable performances are just great showings in losses, he's giving tremendously tough fights to, in Adrian Yanez, one of the best prospects in the whole division, in Marlon Vera, a top 5 fighter now. And neither of them had an easy time with Davey Grant. And also, they're just phenomenally exciting, fun fights. And yeah, this looked like his opportunity to just, take that level of ability against somebody who couldn't match him. And in the first round, that's what it looked like. He was that wonderful combination of weird and seemingly wild, but also calculated and creative and very clear-eyed about what he's doing. Hitting the body tremendously well, sometimes 3-4 punch salvos hitting the body, other times dipping down to hit the body and then coming upstairs. Throwing huge wild hooks, but sort of using the fact that most opponents have to respond to that defensively against them. Like letting you see the shots coming and then using that to gauge your defenses and find ways around it with your follow-ups. And his jab was also working quite well, to be honest. In fact, I think the shot he dropped Smolka with in round 1 was a jab.
Huh?
I think they just sort of exchanged jabs, or tried to, and Davey Grant did a nice little neat sidestep and got his jab in there. It was consistently a pretty effective weapon for him in this fight. And it looked like he was going to crush Louis Smolka. And then Smolka sort of did, with more success, and then suddenly later on much less success, what he did against Matthews Nicolau, who also just sort of thrashed him in the first round, way back in 2017. And then Smolka, showed once again that he's kind of a tricky counterpuncher. That he has to take a serious licking before he will really be able to identify those openings. But kind of like his teammate Chito Vera, he'll just kind of wade in, trigger your offense with that tight high guard, and then interrupt you with surprisingly quick, sharp shots. Smolka does not read as a quick fighter, but he can be pretty sneaky and fast with his hands once he's already in range. It's really the feet, I think, that are slow. And I really, really liked the openings he started fighting, and I think it was also the fact that Grant had slowed down a bit from just going completely ham and beating Smolka up the entirety of the first round. It was probably a 10-8. But Smolka got his moment, and I loved the way he capitalized. Same time counter right hands, blocking. He's got a very sneaky left hook, which he tends to basically hit everyone with at least once really cleanly. He hit Vince Morales with a couple really good ones in their short fight last time out. And I really enjoyed that. What did you think?
Yeah, so I think we saw one of the dynamics that Corner was calling for. Right towards the end of the first round, which is Smolka pressuring in behind the high guard.
Mm-hmm.
And the question became, like, so when it first like started to happen, I think Smolka was a little bit desperate to just make something work.
Yeah.
And so he was just waiting for a shot to bounce off his guard and then just leaping in to punch into the clinch.
Mm-hmm.
And Grant, like, as you said, like an adaptive, clever fighter, he just recognized this very quickly, and he just started slamming punches into the body as hard as he could.
Yep.
And something you would absolutely love to see against high guards in MMA, and you just don't.
Yeah.
Someone's just standing there with their guard up. Just punch them in the body as hard as you can.
Yep. Davey Grant hits you in the body no matter what your guard is, but it really flourishes against this kind of defense.
And yeah, I think one of the things that then Smolka just started, rather than trying to close into the clinch and just absorbing the damage on the way in, which he couldn't. He was physically unable to because Grant was just punching him so hard. He just started punching with Grant. Started counter-punching with him. Started throwing with power on the way in. And Smolka is a puncher.
Yeah.
Like, that's one of the things about... I think that's one of the things that actually makes him a sort of functional fighter and has basically kept him his spot in the UFC. He hits pretty hard. I mean, he has horrific ground and pound.
Oh yeah.
The idea that he just wasn't going to be able to implement it against Davey Grant that was made this seem like such a squash match. He once his punches opened up, the clinch started to open up a bit more for him. I think, in the end, the differences were just, at least partially, just in the attritional damage.
Yeah, yeah.
And, the final sequence was all attrition. It was a calf kick. But it was the fact that Smolka had levered his way back into the fight off punching a pretty immortal person in the face.
Yeah.
And Grant had just been pounding the body, been pounding in low kicks. And then suddenly Smolka's body just gave up on him at the beginning of the third round. You could tell that he was in that kind of Rory Mack versus Robbie Lawler thing where you were just like, oh no.
Yep.
Suddenly just all caught up to him.
Yep. And fair enough. I mean, he had to take damage, a tremendous amount of damage to every part of his body in that first round. Because Grant, we didn't even mention the low kicks, but they were present throughout the fight for Davey Grant. Kicking the legs, hitting the body, landing tons of clean shots to the head. And Smolka did, in the process of finding his way back in, he also did. I mean, Smolka is himself a good attritive fighter. He, some of the better moments in that second round did involve him, succeeding in punching with Grant and then chasing him out of the pocket and landing a low kick on the break. And he is, of course, also a really consistent body puncher. But it was just too little too late. He couldn't catch up. And Grant has a remarkable ability to recover and maintain his pace, even when he is clearly feeling the effects of that pace in the middle of the bout. Yeah, I think you're right. I really like that Smolka, sort of counterintuitively, but he sort of took, I mean, it was almost like the approach Adrian Yanez, took, or I guess a little like Chito Vera. Against Davey Grant, which is like, what's the problem with a guy who's almost all of his punches are wide hooks? You can stand right in the middle and let them bounce off the side and just hit him with shorter, sharper shots. And that's what he did. He really like consciously was timing those shots to get into middle distance where he could punch at the same time as Davey Grant. There were a couple instances where he sort of, in a very weird way, it made me think of like Salvador Sanchez. He would see a big looping right hand coming and he would like just high block it. And as he was blocking, sort of like using Grant's swing and the defense of it as his jab, he would time a step into range with the block and carry a right hand in right after it. Short, straight right hand right on the chin. He also did that because Grant was trying to counter this with body shots. He also entered in a similar way with the right uppercut, expecting Davey Grant to bounce a shot off his guard and then change levels to hunt the body. And on at least one occasion caught him with a clean short uppercut because Grant was trying to hunch down and go after the ribs. So yeah, like he is a puncher. He's a more resourceful, creative fighter than you think, and quicker and more powerful than you think looking at him. And it was just that, yeah, like, who knows how this fight would have gone if he just wasn't crippled by those low kicks or if Grant hadn't gone to those low kicks early. We might be talking about Smolka having won this fight. Fantastic adjustments, but huge credit to Davey Grant, who just, one of his greatest strengths as a fighter is just like in a broad strategic sense, he is going to take absolutely every opening you give him while also trying to force every opening possible by just throwing super hard all the time. And it was his attritive striking that got it done. Yeah.
Genuinely terrifying fighter. I would like to see him I'd like to see both of these guys. I would like to see Davey Grant get like a ranked opponent.
Well, we do talk about one in the.
I need to see Louis Smolka get like a win to make me feel happy now.
I know. In a weird way, it was crueler that he had his comeback because he ended up getting squashed anyway, which is what I expected.
Yeah, it was like the Tony Ferguson thing.
Yeah, right.
Just
exactly.
like, yeah, I'm ready to watch this guy get obliterated. And it's like, oh, he's done quite well. Oh.
Yeah, you were saying before, I think these two fights in quick succession are going to have to inspire, come year end, some kind of, highs and
tragic
lows.
Plot twist.
Yeah, some kind of joy and tragedy. Tragic plot twist is probably the right name for it. Anyway, I think that's probably all the time we have to talk about fights in this card. Is there anything else you wanted to mention very quickly?
I mean, we should talk about Tatsuro Taira just a bit, just to say, looks like a great prospect.
Yep.
Albeit one who, I mean, weirdly enough, you find yourself thinking that you just look at a lot of flyweights and you find yourself thinking, this guy fights like a bantamweight.
Yeah. This pace is too slow. He's trying to counterpunch too much. Yeah, there's quite a few.
I find that a lot.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Just like modern flyweights, maybe it's just the weight cutting paradigm. Maybe it's just modern flyweights just are bantamweights.
That could very well be part of it.
He's an absolutely astonishing grappler who, I mean, the fact that he is a back control specialist is actually a very flyweight thing to have.
Yep. And
very, very useful. Yeah. The pace and the defense are things to be concerned about, but he's already like clearly an upper level fighter in the division.
Yeah, and he was in there against a more typical wild, scrappy scrambler flyweight, and showed that like it is a real strength to have that he could win scrambles when necessary. He had to scramble pretty wildly to get out of a guillotine at one point. It was almost a third round comeback prospect loss of a very typical nature. And a major advantage just ended up being that when he got to better positions, he was able to hold on to them and just kill the scramble with top control. It's a very good thing to have. And there's a good striker who also, hits the body, throws nice straight punches, manages his distance very well, has some defensive awareness that I assume will get better. I would just like to see him, even at that pace, if he would just like build more on the opportunities he does take, like with combinations, that would be cool. But I'm very curious to see how he develops and if that pace will be a problem or if you can just get away with it at flyweight these days.
Yeah, and the other problem being that this is modern flyweight, so after 2 wins, he's going to be sniffing title contention and fighting in title eliminators. So
he's going to lose to Askarov in approximately 8 months.
Yeah, you have very little time. Very, very little time to fix up in this division, I'd say.
Yep. All right. Well, that'll do it. After this, as we said before, we're going to get into a very long edition of the Heavy Bag, answer a bunch of questions. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. Thank you in advance to those who did submit questions. And we will talk to you next week for, I don't know, boxing? A topic? Another topical episode could be fun. We'll see. Okay, heavy bag after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
All right, folks, welcome back to Heavy Hands. As I'm sure I did not forget to mention in the first segment, all of which is being recorded in chronological order. We're here to do the heavy bag. It's been a long time, Phil. A long time since we've opened the old heavy bag.
We have built up a backlog. We have the kind of internet equivalent of the mailroom just filled with sacks spilling everywhere with letters and just generalized chaos.
Yeah. And so yeah, we've got like at least 8 questions here. I didn't count, but we've got quite a few to get through. This is a good time to say, although obviously you may have to wait a while after submitting it to get it answered. But you know, it's only $5 a month. I mean, frankly, Phil, probably should have charged $5 for just the regular bonus episodes from the beginning, if we're being honest. That's what everyone else seems to do, right?
That's because they're chiselers and
that's
the
right.
real fans come here.
We're honest and we respect you, and that's why we keep you waiting for 8 months to answer your questions.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start running through these, just in the order that I opened them. This one here is from Isaac. I've just decided, by the way, to go with everyone's first names. So sometimes I read full names. I'm not always sure if people want that. Sometimes people have silly fake names, which is fine. I'm just going to go with first names unless otherwise directed. First question is from Isaac, who asks, Dear Heavy Hands Boys, as a longtime listener and fellow fan of Wild Man Fighters, what does that mean, by the way? Do I look like a wild? I'm the technique nerd guy, right?
We like some wild guys.
Yeah, it's true. I guess I like Douglas De Silva, Alex Morono. I like some goofy swingers. All right, fair enough, Isaac. He asks, at what point is a strike too wild? He asks this after listening to our picks on Schnell versus Royval. So this is actually quite a recent question. With Royval taking a capital T technical approach against Bontarine in a fight that was much closer than it needed to be, I wonder what middle ground is necessary for Royval to be consistent against the best of flyweight. Okay. So, relevant to our discussion, I guess, of the occasions when I will pick somebody based on, hey, I think they do things correctly and this time it's going to work. When, of course, you know, correct technique does not always win fights. It frequently does not, although it's still important. At what point is a strike too wild?
I mean, logically, it's at the point at which you get punished for it.
Sure. Yeah, it's very contextual.
Yeah. And being punished is not necessarily just the idea of getting countered. Like, you actually get, knocked out or hurt for doing it, but also just, punished in terms of missing, in terms of losing position, that kind of thing. And
wasting energy.
Yeah. And those bad outcomes from getting too wild, they change from strike to strike. But sometimes, it's totally worth going crazy.
Sure.
So talk a bit more about this, but last week we had Davey Grant, who is a wild striker.
Yep.
He's a pretty coherent striker within that wildness. Mm-hmm. Everything is always driving someone into another. Everything is always kind of driving someone into another strike.
Yeah.
But conversely, we saw Justin Gaethje week before that getting too wild against Charles Oliveira on the understanding that he just had to throw as hard as he feasibly could to hit Oliveira to get him out of there. So, I mean, I think Schnell and Royval, I think, are great examples of... Schnell, I think, is one of the few fighters, I think, in UFC who's one of his traditional problems has been that he doesn't get wild enough. I mean, I don't necessarily say that's within like that because he would get into brawls and get knocked out.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of
he did against Royval.
Yeah. Oh, that wasn't really so much. That was really him, like trying to keep the grappling going and running into a guillotine.
True, but he did also fight like a maniac and take a lot of shots.
Hmm. But he, I think Royval was definitely probably on the. Royval was getting the worst of it, worst of it quite consistently.
Mm-hmm.
I guess a better example of this would be, James Krause. I think he's probably someone who actually doesn't put enough venom on his shots. But I think he's got his fight against Jorge Masvidal is one where you can see it was one where actually statistically outlands Masvidal quite a lot. Mm-hmm. Like Masvidal simply hits him harder, and there's no doubt, absolutely no doubt as to who wins the fight.
Mm-hmm. But does that always come down to wildness? I mean, there are proper ways to generate power, and to put more into your shots that do not involve getting wild. I mean, just to bring up another example of somebody being punished for wildness that is just slightly more recent than Davey Grant. Iwan Cutelaba, who lost in the co-main event last weekend because it was unprecedented, but he appeared to get too mad and throw a shot with such force that he fell over on hands and knees and then promptly got choked out. So, I would say that it is absolutely contextual. I would also differentiate between shots being wide and shots being wild, because there are lots of reasons to throw wide shots. Mm-hmm. They work in ways that straight shots do not. Like, we're well past the old days of like early boxing history when there was like this debate largely between like American fighters and English fighters. About like, which is better, the straight shot or the hook? Like, I think everyone can agree they're all good, and it just depends on what you're trying to do. And they all also have limitations. You can't slip a hook as easily as you can slip a straight shot, but you might see the hook coming from further away. It might have less reach, etc., etc. Davey Grant is he's so deliberate and and chooses his strikes so well, and is clearly thinking and calculating and coming up with ideas. Like, there was a very cool sequence in that Louis Smolka fight where he threw this like crazy shifting combo. Certainly looks wild, but then he comes in, sells the same exact step, and lands a spinning back fist that hurts Louis Smolka. Like, this is not a man who's just in there throwing caution to the wind for no reason. I would say he's more on the wide side of things than he is wild. He's just a wide puncher who just like doesn't mind that you see his shots coming because he feels he can take whatever you send back at him, and you're going to have to respect these big looping shots that are coming at you. Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of answered it in the only way it can be answered. If a shot is too wild, then it's because something bad happened. And I would say that erring on the side of not throwing any shots truly wildly is probably better than the inverse. Which is, of course, not.
I think historically, yeah. I think you can look at lots of fighters and just be like, if you just tightened it up, you'd be much better off. There's very few cases where you just go after the guy and go nuts.
Yeah. And again, even if you were trying to go after a guy and go nuts, just like putting tons of offense out there, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to throw away your form. Like that, to me, that's what wild means, is that you are slugging with no thought for balance or the ability to connect to future shots or future defensive movements, that each shot is like a desperate act that leaves you out of position and stranded. That is wild. And that is, if that's the definition of wild, then any wildness is too wild, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's just, I would mostly classify it, if you're not going to classify it as stuff which is just kind of just bad. I think it's just high risk, high reward stuff.
Yeah.
I think the basic tenet behind that kind of stuff is that you have to read what your opponent is going to do very exactly.
Exactly, yeah.
If you want to flying knee someone, if you want to spinning back fist someone, you need to either have a very good idea of where they're going to be, how they're going to react, or you need to get very lucky.
Yeah. And if it's a big, crazy looping shot or a leaping shot or something like that, and even if it does leave you in a somewhat compromised position, but you have enough experience and wherewithal to get out of that position to make the correct adjustments, then if you like set it up, or you put your opponent in a position where they can't respond effectively, it's not too wild.
Mm-hmm.
It's always contextual. All right. So, Isaac, I hope that typically sort of mealy-mouthed answer was no less than you expected. Thank you very much for the question and for your support. Let's move on to a question from Jeffrey. He asks, what fighters or fighter archetypes do you think benefit the most from the banning of knees to the head of grounded opponents? Personally, I think wrestlers wouldn't be quite so high and mighty without that rule. What do you say, Phil?
So this is an I mean, one of the things is that it's specified knees, right?
Yes.
Which is apart from anything else, a tricky strike to define, because obviously Pride and so on simply have, you can land kicks to the head of grounded opponents, and it's just basically in the UFC, if you use any part of your leg to kick someone in the head when they're on the floor, that's a foul.
Yeah.
So
we're not talking soccer kicks here, although we could expand the question to include that. We're not talking stomps, we're talking knees. That's Jeffrey's question.
Yeah. So, I mean, and that I think does change the calculus a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, also it would actually probably be quite difficult to enforce. Like,
I mean, it already is.
Yeah, but it would be harder if you were like, oh, did that guy catch him with his what? Oh, did he catch him with like his shin? What's a knee? It would start to get tricky, right? But who do I think would benefit? Pardon me.
Oh my God. So unprofessional. Sorry. Bless you.
I know this. I think actually,
an Irishman
with most
must have
ground
walked by.
Control positions, I think we might end up with wrestlers being benefited more than anti-wrestlers.
Yeah.
Because the ability to just like get people down into a control position and then be able to punish them on the way up by kneeing them in the head.
Yeah.
Peter Yan and Aljamain Sterling, and obviously Peter Yan has to be our pick for best beneficiary of this scoring.
Yeah. What style would benefit?
Or of this rule change?
Piotr Yan.
Just for that reason. And, just the ability to utilize knees to the head of a grounded opponent also as a kind of ground and pound. Who was it? Max Sakurai against Shinya Aoki.
Mm-hmm.
But the times when you could use it defensively probably be relatively limited, and probably they're more tied to they're also more tied to an era where one of the primary takedown techniques was simply double legs and the primary defensive technique was sprawling. Because that's really where you'd be able to knee someone in the head if you sprawled on them.
Yeah, which clearly is what Jeffrey's thinking about when he thinks that wrestlers would be hampered by this, is that he's envisioning a striker sprawling on a shot and then getting off a bunch of free knees.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, Phil, that like, I think pretty clearly it would benefit, if they were allowed, that would benefit the people who already have the most control over whether or not they're on top of their opponent or not. And while there is an avenue to counter wrestlers if you can sprawl on a shot, it is one kind of takedown. It also leaves you engaged with the wrestler on the ground, and sort of for the same reason that knees, the standing knees, are a tricky counter to shots, is like there's a high level of risk there. I would usually say that uppercuts are a better counter to shots than knees, simply for the fact that you don't take one of your feet off the ground in order to land it. You maintain the ability to move your feet immediately afterwards. You can even be moving your feet, changing angle while throwing an uppercut. Whereas a knee leaves you temporarily stationary and off-balanced, or at least susceptible, very susceptible to being off-balanced. So the timing has to be perfect, and we see way more people get taken down while attempting to counter with a knee than we do people knocking wrestlers out with counter knees. It's a very high risk, obviously a very high reward, but a high risk maneuver. And in a slightly less risky way, but strikers sprawling on a wrestler and trying to work them with knees, you're in a more stable position. You've already killed the momentum of the shot, but you are remaining engaged with the wrestler in a wrestling situation. And I don't think it would take too long for wrestlers to get used to using those moments to collect one of those legs you're trying to throw at their head, or time the knee, feeling you loading up, to adjust their position and work up to a reshot, and you're still in a position where they can continue working to take you down. Contrary to that, wrestlers get to take you down, and so they're going to be the ones kneeing you in the face, which was typically the case, even in the days when I think wrestling was a little more one note, more reliant on powerful shots, and we did see strikers kneeing wrestlers in the top of the head. We still saw way more wrestlers, like, Mark Coleman loved kneeing people in the head.
Kevin
Randleman, my God. We still saw way more people who specialized in getting their opponents down, getting to take advantage of the knees. So yeah, I would say wrestlers. I mean, imagine, by the way, how many times in modern MMA in the cage, in the UFC, we now see wrestlers dominating opponents up against the fence in like a half taken down position. You allow knees to the head in like the Khabib position, you're going to see some strikers getting crushed by wrestlers.
Yeah, like the Anderson Silva knee against JL.
Oh my God.
But you could do that. You wouldn't have to worry about hitting them in the chest.
Yeah.
Just goes down.
Although obviously in that particular example, that is a striker kneeing a wrestler.
Yes.
Yeah. Obviously everyone would get the chance to take advantage of it, but I think in the balance, the wrestlers would be the ones just better positioned to get more knees off.
Yeah. I mean, it's just the fact that, the knees always come from someone always come from someone winning the exchange first in some way. Like, it only really works from the sprawl if you sprawl on someone well enough to completely destroy their posture.
Yeah.
So if someone just sprawls well enough to stop the takedown, still trying to keep, and the other person is still driving, you still have to keep their hips back, their feet down in order to not, go down. It's only if they manage to completely crush the other guy's posture and drive them into the mat and get their shoulders above the the attacker's shoulders, that they're actually, they have enough space to be able to knee effectively. So yeah, it did really, a lot of the time it really came down to who won who won the grappling, and that would be the wrestlers, I think.
And especially in today's UFC, I think we are seeing broadening of takedown games, we're seeing less reliance on just shots. We are, I think, today seeing a lot more clinch takedowns and stuff like that against the fence. And that's just, or people, get a shot and you try to sprawl, but they just drive you to the fence, and then they can work for a double leg in a position where it's very difficult to knee them anyway. 'Cause you don't even get a full sprawl. So yeah, I think wrestlers would do pretty well with that rule, if I'm honest.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
Okay, thank you, Jeffrey, for that question. Let's move on to a question from Cameron, who wants us to talk about Derek Lewis. Do we think he might be a worse matchup for Francis Ngannou than Cyril Gane, due to his lack of activity and increased power? Seems to me that Gane's level of activity might leave more openings for Ngannou's counterpunching. Does this seem reasonable? We do have one fight from Ngannou against each now. This question, I think, was asked before the Ngannou-Gane fight, so it's pretty easy to see at least some difference between how Ngannou has handled these two men. Albeit, I think. Well, frankly, I don't think either was a particularly good performance from Francis Ngannou. But one, he was clearly more resourceful and didn't just let the fight go away. So, what do you think, Phil? Is Derek Lewis tougher for Ngannou than Cyril Gane?
I mean, I guess it would depend on the main thing is that, like, is there some psychological hang-up that Francis Ngannou has with Derek Lewis, like one Rose Namajunas clearly has with Carla Esparza? Because otherwise, if you take the raw pieces of Francis Ngannou's game, he should just absolutely obliterate Derek Lewis.
You'd think so.
Shouldn't be difficult to build. Shouldn't be difficult at all to build a version of Francis Ngannou that can simply just solve Derek Lewis.
Yeah.
Apart from anything else, all he needs to do is really low kick him a few times. Lewis doesn't like low kicks at all.
Yeah.
And that's it. That's really just kind of it.
Low kicks, body punches, all manner of straight shots.
He could, if he doesn't tire himself out too badly, he probably could take him down.
Probably. He's probably one of the few guys who's just big enough to get away with it.
Yeah. Exactly. So, I guess it is entirely possible that, like, Ngannou might just have a hang-up about Lewis in that he's just like, man, this guy's much more, he's as powerful as me. And he just might feel, like, intimidated into quiescence. But in general, I would say probably not. I would say that Gane is, like, just on paper, Gane just has much more ways of winning a matchup with Ngannou than Lewis does.
Yeah.
It would entirely depend on whether Ngannou has a terrifying trauma about that fight.
Which he may. He really may. And I do think there is probably, I think it was a bad time in Ngannou's career. I don't think he was in the best psychological place to approach this sort of, oh my God, we're evenly matched feeling. For a guy who clearly, takes some solace in having the power to just hurt people at will. I do think there is probably a hang up there. Where he probably would have a pretty slow, dreadful fight with Derek Lewis if they were to rematch.
Or you would do the opposite of Esparza against Namajunas, and he would.
I can't let that happen again. I'd better.
Yeah, make the adjustment completely, like, just wrench the lever so far in the other direction until it broke, and would just come out, like, screaming and sprinting at Lewis, just windmilling both hands.
Which might work.
It probably would, yeah, let's be honest.
Might work fine. Yeah, I mean, I think you can look at those two fights, and you can look at Ngannou Gane, and I think there's plenty of room to say Cyril Gane could do better than that. There were a lot of missed opportunities in that fight. Granted, in a completely different way than we expected, it was still a fight where, like, singular moments won rounds for Ngannou. But I think he could have won the rounds he did well in much, much more decisively. And put a lot more volume out there and really tried to wear Ngannou out. And conversely, you look at Lewis and Ngannou, and it's almost impossible not to look at it and say Ngannou could do better than that. So yeah, I think Gane is still probably a tougher matchup. Even though Ngannou beat him, I think it could take the stupidest, most simplistic overcorrection from Ngannou, and he might just beat Derek Lewis, because at the end of the day, there's just not that much Derek Lewis can do. And he gets tired, and he's a mess. So, I would still say
he's not even hyper-durable.
No. Yeah, I mean, he's pretty durable. I mean, he's certainly, he's more durable than heavyweights who don't get to that level. He's durable enough, but yeah, absolutely. I think Ngannou could.
Or at least he was.
True. We don't
anymore.
We don't know anymore. So I'm going to go with Gane. I think he's still a tougher matchup. All right. Thank you, Cameron. Let's move on to a question from Wayne, who asks, I actually have to look at this one first, so we're going to skip that for now, and we'll come back to it.
Is this the good tricky one?
Good tricky one.
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah.
It's related to Barry Robinson, a boxing coach, and
oh no, there's another couple. Yeah, oh no, there's another one I was thinking of. Yeah. So, okay, no, let's keep going.
So we'll get back to that one, Wayne. Let's move on to a question from Seth. He says, "What are your thoughts on the idea that biased judging in favor of the grappler in top position, especially in early MMA, has fundamentally and potentially unfairly changed MMA as a sport? What strategies might we see if judging placed more value on effective striking or submission attempts from the bottom and less on position?" So first of all, do we think judging is biased in favor of grapplers in top position? I would say yes to this day. It's still, I mean, even like my own judging to an extent, if there's very little offense to decide between the fighters and one person's on top, to me that is a superior control judgment, and I'm going to pick that fighter for winning the rounds. I don't even know if that's really a bias, actually, looking at it from that perspective, because I am perfectly happy to give someone a round if they're stuck on bottom, but they're the only one doing anything. So I guess that's not bias. That's just my interpretation of following the scoring criteria. Do we think it has potentially unfairly changed MMA as a sport? Because I mean, well, first of all, Phil, do you think there's a bias towards top position from judges?
Yeah.
And do you think it has unfairly changed the sport?
So there's a few ways of looking at what you consider to be bias, right? Are you saying there is a bias within the context of the rules? Are you saying that, like, the rules themselves tend to favor top control, or is it something other than that? I think it probably needs a little bit of clarification when you're saying, when you're determining exactly what bias is, because, ideally, you want MMA and a hypothetically great MMA rule set to do is you want it to reward the person who won the fight.
Yeah.
And whilst, keeping people safe, basically. And I think in that way, I think I've mentioned this before, I've sort of become a bit of a top control apologist in recent times. I have sort of shifted away from the, activity on the bottom, and even from the, I think I am more likely to give people rounds for top control. and a lot of other people are, you know, when they're weighted against striking on the feet. Because, as, you know, any fighters have said and clearly feel viscerally, really don't like being on the bottom.
Yeah.
And that sort of means that I value it more, because then I realize that, like, psychologically, the person who is getting on top is really, like, really sucks being on the bottom, and in a way that, like, fighters quite enjoy trading shots. They're not really feeling pain or anything like that. They're not really getting hurt by shots. They're not getting demoralized, but a lot of the time being stuck on the bottom, like, does genuine, like, it tires them out, and
you feel like you're losing.
And it tires them out, frustrates them, and they feel like they're losing. Yeah.
Which is why fighters get all butthurt and frustrated about it, because they feel like they're losing unfairly, but they feel like they're losing. That's why they get mad and are clearly uncomfortable. Yeah, I mean, it is different from, control on the feet. This has always been an interesting and difficult sort of riddle for me, because, MMA judging has now once again shifted in the direction of damage. There was a while where they tried to avoid that word. I guess they're trying to pretend it's not fighting. They've now shifted back to, impact and damage being the most important things to decide a round. But there is still this thing with MMA judging where it's not boxing or kickboxing. It does feel like grappling should score. And it obviously can't be scored along the exact same metrics as striking. You have different goals. And because, like, there's a certain, if you were to take it to one extreme, you could say that somebody who gets a near miss on 24 submission attempts, but just constantly has their opponent defending, has accomplished nothing. And that should not be in the scoring at all. Or someone who gets position and prevents their opponent from doing anything, is that a draw? Because they didn't do any damage, or say their opponent does just enough damage to keep it a question of the fight was pretty even, but they were being controlled the entire time. Should they win if they do just a little? It does feel like there should be some weighting in order to reward grappling, which has entirely different goals and methods of scoring points, figuratively, than striking. And in that respect, it is totally different from being controlled on the feet. If you're being pushed around, there's like a bubble of space that you're responding to, you're trying to stay out of danger. But if you're being taken down and controlled, you literally are being controlled. The person is out grappling you. Whereas me just walking you down and you staying away from me, I'm not out striking you in that context. Not the way I see it. You literally can't escape because I'm holding you. So I don't know. I also tend to be, while I will definitely and have given plenty of rounds to people who got stuck on bottom, but were just way more active, there can be a decent margin of the person on bottom being more active. And if I see the person on top landing a few quality strikes, my assumption is going to be those probably hurt more. They had better leverage and they were keeping the person down. The person was flailing, and yes, they elbowed the top of their head a bunch of times, but to me, the person on top still wins the round most of the time that happens. I don't know if
that's the thing. I mean, I think top position grappling can feel unfair because it's unfair. You know, you're just in an opportunity to do more. You can inflict more damage.
Yeah.
And that can make it extra frustrating when the person on top simply doesn't. And we've been in like a recent golden era for really absolute quality trash coming out lately.
Trash of what kind?
So obviously lately we had just... Sorry, what was that?
You cut out for a minute there. We've been in a golden era of what?
Well, we've been in a golden era for terrible fights.
Oh, absolutely.
Recently. And yeah, we recently got to see like some real trash throwbacks. And one of them was Michael Page against Logan Stalley, which is, I think, actually like a genuinely good example of because that's the thing, even historically, there aren't that many like super egregious lay and pray decisions that you could think of that just changed direction of the sport.
Yeah, ones where it's like you absolutely should have lost, but you won because you were on top.
Huh?
I think I agree. Yeah, I mean, I can think of more examples of fights where people were shocked that the person who was stuck on bottom the whole time won, like Bosroot and Kevin Randleman is the classic example. Yeah, usually when the person who's just on top wins, I'm usually in. I can at least see a perfectly good case for why they got the nod.
Yeah, because it's just hard to win from the bottom.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I think there are points at which you should, essentially be penalized for simply holding your opponent down and not doing anything.
Yeah.
As in, if that's really what you're trying to do, you shouldn't be given very many points for it. In part because, not even simply because of the perception of, my primary criteria, which is, who's winning the fight. Because unfortunately, someone who's just sitting on top and just holding guard and doing nothing sort of is winning the fight in a really annoying psychological way.
Mm-hmm.
Part due to the secondary consideration, which is that the sport should look cool and fun.
Yeah.
And hence why we have things like stand-ups and round breaks, for that matter, and rounds.
Yeah.
There have to be entertainment concessions. Yeah, in general, I don't think that the history of the sport has been that changed by top position bias so much as it's been like position bias simply favors both positional control and ground and pound to such an extent it would dominate anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I think in many ways, like, much of the bias has, some of the bias in terms, things like round breaks and stand-ups and so on, been sort of deliberately put in the other direction in order to make sure that kind of boring stuff didn't happen.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, at what point are you getting into a territory where, like we do with defense, where you just have to say it's its own reward? Should it be rewarded by scoring? But I think largely that is kind of how it feels to me. Like again, there are fights where the person from bottom is more active, but I just think, part of the person on top, part of top control being its own reward is that when they land shots, I'm like, that's a better shot than all of these little zero wind up elbows from a position of zero leverage. And so I'm going to weight that as being more effective. So I don't know. I think. Yeah, I tend to agree. I don't think there is too much of a bias in favor of top control. Most of the time when those fighters win those fights, it's pretty justifiable in my eyes.
Yeah, I think. I think the Stalley Page fight, I think, is probably that is a genuine example of an actual kind of lay and pray robbery that we've seen lately.
Yeah.
The person was so inactive on top. And again, we mentioned this amount on the Eunice Esparza. One of these ones where I was like, I didn't think this could happen in the modern era in, for tier MMA promotions. It was, Stalley did so little on top at the fairly small amount of strikes that Michael Page landed I think should just easily be enough to win him the fight.
Right.
Fortunately, MMA has become so offensively oriented that fortunately doesn't happen very often.
Mm-hmm.
People do use, the incredibly naturally offensively privileged top position to actually land offense.
Right. Yeah. There aren't a lot of just straight up lay-in prey artists anymore.
Yeah, I mean, even historically, I don't think there are
a lot of the guys who got maligned for it, you know, John Fitch was a weathering man to have on top of you most of the time. Were they the biggest shots in the world? No, but there was a lot of them. GSP gets maligned as a lay and prey fighter. GSP has tremendously good ground and pound.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's. Yeah, I think you made a good point that already the rules of the sport are kind of biased against allowing those kinds of wins to happen. So I think it's kind of been sorted in my opinion.
And you still get things like story MVP, but they're incredibly rare, and I think you can point to them as simply examples of bad judging rather than like an institutional bias at this point.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that question, Seth. Certainly an interesting one to talk about. All right, so that does it for this week's episode of Heavy Hands. I hope you guys enjoyed that, and please do not be dissuaded from continuing to submit questions for future reference, even though it will obviously often take quite a while for us to get to them. We hope the wait was worth it. We certainly enjoyed fielding your questions. And if you want to sign up to ask those or support the show in some other way, you should do that at patreon.com. /Heavy Hands, I think it is. Find Phil on Twitter at Evil Greg Jackson. Find me at Boxing Bush. Feel free to ask us questions there as well, although there is no guarantee of us replying. If they're interesting questions, I at least probably will. Phil will probably make fun of you. But I would never. And we'll talk to you next week when, I don't know what our topic is going to be. We've got an absolutely dreadful card next weekend, which has nothing to do with the fact that there are women fighting at the top of it, does it, Phil? Does it?
It's Holly Holm.
It's Holly Holm.
The Holly Holm main event.
She's very good. She's very nice. Everyone likes her. And she's
boring.
She's boring.
Followed up by a Rosenstrike main event. Oh my god.
Well, there's a week delay after this card, so we'll see what we end up talking about. We'll have to come up with some fun topics or dip into some other combat sports. Whatever ends up happening, thank you all very much for listening. Thank you once again to those who submitted questions for the heavy bag. And until next week, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.